what does the PSC do? They're actually, there's Title 69 in Montana Code Annotated describes the structure and function of the PSC, so there is a description of it. They just don't have a job description. And this is on the website, and I think it's a good description. The Montana Public Service Commission strives to ensure that ratepayers have continued access to utility services that are affordable, reliable, and sustainable for the long term. And I underlined access because that's in the title of my talk. This is also on the website. In pursuit of this goal, the PSC regulates the rates and service quality for investors, investor-owned electric, natural gas, water, wastewater, and legacy telecommunication companies. It's the PSC's job to balance the interest of ratepayers who are concerned about utility rate increases, balancing that with the need to maintain a financially sound utility that is capable of providing reliable service. So what is required for PSC to fulfill its duty of ensuring access for the public? Okay, so this is part of that quote. So ensuring that ratepayers have continued access to utility services that are affordable, reliable, and sustainable for the long term, that's a quote from the website, requires an understanding of what could adversely affect access, affordability, reliability, and sustainability. Makes sense, right? So does your access to power and water need to be safeguarded? I think that the energy crisis in Europe would suggest that that is definitely the case. And is it the government's job to protect that? I would say yes. This is from the Declaration of Independence. To secure the rights endowed by our Creator, quote, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. We can't live without power and water, so I would consider that to be a God-given right. So the energy crisis in Europe, I've been following that very closely. Businesses are closing. They're being, in large part because they can't keep their electricity on, can't keep the lights on. They're having limits how many hours a day they can keep their businesses over. There's poverty. There are you can watch people out there scrounging for coal and power. They're out there scrounging for cordwood and chips for the cold winter. They're in some desperate situation over there in Europe. And so the short answer regarding why that is reliance on foreign and so-called green sources of power. So the energy crisis in Europe, what can we learn in order to prevent our own crisis? Maintain U.S. energy independence using truly reliable sources of power. Remember the headlines, multiple countries in Europe were returning to coal this year when they couldn't get the energy they needed. They couldn't get the gas and the oil and the coal from Russia, and then they turned back to coal, and now they're talking about floating gas terminals. So they're going back to the old ways because the green ways didn't work. So the energy crisis, what can we learn from this to prevent our own crisis? Short answer, consider the possibility of crisis by design. And we are familiar, especially this group, with use of crises to further various ends, usually nefarious. So this is Rahm Emanuel, U.S. House Representative 2003 to 2009, White House Chief of Staff 2009 to 2010, Mayor of Chicago 2011 to 2019. He was quoted as saying, "You never let a serious crisis go to waste." And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before. So we're very familiar with this. It's been going on for a long time, probably forever. Using crisis is as popular and as old as divide and conquer. So it's just it's a way to overcome people. So this gentleman, he was a philosopher, a journalist in the 1920s. The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and thus clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary. Not all of ours are imaginary, but they're exaggerated for sure, and many of them are manufactured. And what's the purpose of bringing about crisis is to bring about fear. And this is that quote from Edmund Burke. No passion so effectively robs the mind of its powers of acting and reasoning as fear. We saw that during the COVID-19 debacle, what fear does to people's minds, their brains. And that's how crisis works. And then they clamor for government or the vaccine companies or whatever to come and save us. So threats to the treasure state, they're talking about that. We are called the treasure state for a reason, and yet they're talking about we have to worry about power. They were talking about possible brownouts and blackouts. There have been some droughts in Montana, and I remember they were talking about rationing water here in the Flathead when we were having a flood. So that was a little bit of a bit strange. And if you adversely affect power and water, you're going to adversely affect our food supply. And so they are talking about threats of all of these things. So is this crisis by design? In other words, is the crisis manufactured? Is there truly a crisis? Is it being exaggerated? For counting the crisis and the very real threats to Montanans, the strategy will depend on whether the crisis is natural or manufactured. So today I'm going to discuss three main things: energy, water, and climate crisis. Is it manufactured? Is it exaggerated? I'm going to spend probably most of my time talking about that. Some of Montana's strengths in fighting the crisis, so-called, and how to combat it, and how can the PSC help. So Montanans, we cannot survive without reliable access to readily dispatchable power and water. We're number one. Montana's number one per capita in the United States for power consumption. The reason for that should be kind of obvious. It gets really cold in the winter. So per capita, we are number two. North Dakota is number one. We can't survive without power and water. What does dispatchable power mean? It means base load, which is the power available to you 24/7, where you can switch the light on anytime, you can run your washer, dryer, you can do all of those things. It's what's available to you 24/7. And there's a reason Montana is called the treasure state. Montana's abundant natural resources. We have everything that we need to be energy independent and water abundant. Everything we need. So in the United States, Montana's number one in usable coal reserves and number 7 in hydroelectric power. And I believe if we were able to fully develop our hydroelectric power, we could probably be number one or close to it. And we could probably take care of the electrical needs of the entire western side of the country. So in 2021, Montana was ranked among the top 10 states with the largest share of electricity generated from renewables. And our number one renewable is hydropower. So some changes have occurred since the 2015 lawsuit against the coal-fired plant's coal strip against their owners. In 2021, coal generated 43% of Montana's in-state electricity, and until 2016, coal consistently supplied over 50% of in-state generation. In 2015, Montana exported roughly 50% of its electricity production. 2021, roughly 44%. So Montana is a powerhouse and a potential powerhouse, primarily via hydroelectric and coal resources. So in 2020, hydroelectric power generation exceeded coal-fired for the first time in more than 2 decades before coal reassumed the top spot in 2021. So here's a pie graph that goes the different types of sources of electricity. I have the coal-fired plants provided the largest share of electricity production in 2021. There you see 1% is solar, 12% is wind, 41% is hydro, 44% coal. And this shows you the amount of intrastate within the state is 30%, 20% is other countries we're sending out, and then 50% to other states. So we have all this coal and we have all this water. Why in the treasure state that's so abundant in resources are there threats of blackouts, brownouts, water rationing, and inability to irrigate? Focus on solar and wind power has been at the expense of reliable, affordable sources of power. That's the biggest reason. Lawsuits that led to the shutdown of coal strip units 1 and 2 and are threatening to shutter units 3 and 4 by 2025. So there's talk of shuttering hydroelectric plants. The salmon wars, I've been following those for a long time. It used to be with the salmon farms, and now it's the focus of the salmon wars is the different dams like on the Snake River in Idaho. And recently, humans are on top of that salmon war because they were talking about shutting down some of the smaller dams because the water was too warm for the salmon. Now, we have ways of cooling the water so that the salmon can survive. We have these little ladders that the fish can climb up to get through, and there are even hydroelectric turbines that make it easier for the fish to get through. So we have the technology to take care of those little fishies. The good news is the humans are winning in Idaho. The governor just recently said that until they can find a way to allow people to have electricity and irrigate their land, that they're not going to shut down those smaller dams. So when I first heard that, I thought, wow, that is a miracle. And then I realized he's running for re-election, so he's got, it's a practical matter. But anyway, we'll take it. We'll take what we can get. You know, if they often don't listen to reason, but sometimes you put a little pressure on them, and sometimes they'll do the right thing. So water compacts, that's a big passion of mine, and that's been a big problem. In Lake County, people have to drill a well on their own property. They have to ask permission of the water court and the tribal leaders, so it's a bit of a problem. So core requirements have reduced Montana generation. You can see there, everything in Montana has gone down in its generation. And this slide is particularly a concern because it shows that we're actually having to import power in. We're having to import it. And so there's no reason for that whatsoever. It really has to do with the shutting down of Colstrip is the reason why. It correlates with that. And so, you know, like Northwest Energy, the other monopolies, they're having to go to the open market to compete. It doesn't make sense. This should not be happening. It's not natural phenomenon, I'll put it that way. So, so how can this be? How can there be threats to powerhouse resource abundant treasure state? There's some traceable actions that are and were a worldwide trend, and one of them I'm going to talk about fairly briefly. It's called the Renewable Portfolio Standard, or RPS. And this was in 2005. Montana's RPS required electricity suppliers to acquire at least 15% of the electricity they sell in-state from renewable energy sources starting in 2015. Now in Montana, we reached that pretty easily because of all of our hydroelectric capability and other things. We reached them then and now. But here's the ticker on this, and this was a worldwide phenomenon. This wasn't just in Montana, it wasn't just in the United States. It was a worldwide phenomenon that what they tried to do with this legislation is say that the large hydroelectric dams should not be considered renewable. Here's the language. They defined renewable. Wind, solar, geothermal, water power. In the case of hydroelectric project that does not require a new appropriation, diversion, or impoundment of water that has a nameplate rating of 10 megawatts or less. In other words, the large hydroelectric plants, even though it's perfectly green and clean and all of that, they did not call it renewable. And that was a worldwide phenomenon. And so in terms of funding and those kinds of things, made it very, very difficult. And it got in the psyche of people that somehow that's not a renewable source. So don't underestimate this battleground for God's laws of life and liberty, power and water. And don't underestimate either the power of we the people working with governmental bodies closest to us, the legislative branch. This is something that happened in 2013. So 2005 was when Montana, when they said that hydroelectric, the larger dams, were not to be considered a renewable source. In 2013, the Montana legislative session, hydroelectric was reinstated as a renewable energy source, Senate Bill 45, and there was bipartisan support. That was just 5 sessions ago. Today there's complete division, but back then this fine Senate Bill 45 was actually introduced by a Democrat. So why in Montana are solar and wind being promoted as the answer to our energy needs? They cannot provide reliable baseload or peak power. The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. They rely on batteries, fossil fuels, hydroelectric, and government subsidies, your tax dollars, and Federal Reserve printing press. And I have hydrocarbons in parentheses for fossil fuels because it's controversial whether they should actually be called fossil fuels, because some of them are too far down in the earth to consider them to have come from dead animals or foliage. So creation and destruction of these sources are harmful to the environment, and I'm going to get into that quite a bit in this talk. So here you see this beautiful blue, these just lovely solar panels. And here's just a cute, you got the cute little ladybug just crawling over the top of it, and it's just, everything's just all fun and wonderful, and we're just going to save the world. This is actually what they look like when people are done with them. Here's somebody in their backyard. I guess they've been doing this for quite a while. This is dumped in their backyard, dumped in a dumpster. Here's some guys working on it. Look at those piles. Okay, so this is probably in California. You look at all of those and you think about, they're probably all going to come up for expiration. You know, these things don't last forever, 15 or 20 years. So once this expires, all of those are going to be there. It's going to be a pile that's about 10 times the size of these things. This is what it looks like. Now windmills, I really like the look of this windmill, and I'd like to have this on the back of my pickup. I don't know if y'all have seen my pickup, but I just think this would look so cool. So I would really like to have that. I mean, it's beautiful, and it's a very romantic idea to have wind. I really like the idea. It definitely has its place. This is like the ultimate in romantic. You got the water, you got the beautiful grass, the little cabin, and the big windmill. And windmills do serve a purpose, especially in these countries. I'm not saying that they don't, but this is the idyllic way of thinking about it. And I think probably all freedom lovers dream of living off grid, right? I sure do. And solar and wind have much to offer to the grid as well, but they cannot give us the base load and peak load to meet the challenge that we face. They simply can't do it. Some people think these are ugly. Some people think they're cute. This looks a little bit romantic. You know, you got the beautiful sunset back there. This is not pretty at all. This beautiful countryside became an industrial park. Look at that along the highway. These beautiful green, and then you've got these things. So windmill technology is amazing. All the gears they put in there. I mean, just our Judith Gap wind farm. It's pretty low level. The winds there blow about 8 to 15 miles an hour, and because of all the gears that are in there interconnecting, they can get up to 50-mile-an-hour winds when they run. So it's amazing, but it's also very expensive. Each one of these costs about $2.3 million, and it requires petroleum. So the speed and dimension of turbine blades, I think, is extremely interesting. So Judith Gap, they go about 50 miles, maybe 60 miles an hour at the most. The latest ones, they go 120 to 180 miles an hour. And the dimensions of the ones in Judith Gap are 126 feet long. And I'll show you a picture of that next to a man. And they go 50 to 60, and they're 126 feet long, but now the greatest is 170 feet long, which is more than half a football field. And the others are 350 feet long, which is greater than a football field. So, I mean, how'd you like to live in that neighborhood, next to one of these things with a 350-foot, missile going through the air? So anyway, so this is Judith Gap. I mean, this is 126 feet long. You'd look at the size of that compared to the size of a man. And that's just child's play. You compare that to 170 to 350 feet. There's one in France that's 100, and it's 351.8 feet long. Anyway, so the lifespan of these things is 15 to 25 years. Cause of death? All motors equipment. I mean, there's fiberglass and there's metal fatigue, and there's just different things wear out over time and rust and those kinds of things. But these blades, these wind blades, they have a special, additional causes of death that are kind of similar to what you get on propellers of airplanes, and it's called leading edge erosion. And so if these things, they're hitting snowflakes and sand and water and bird poop and all kinds of things, and eventually, it's like being sandblasted for 20 years, and it wears them down. And you can imagine, first time they flip around and they hit some particles in the air, it's going to throw off things a little bit at least. And then there's this. Somebody mentioned the birds, these large birds of prey. It's estimated 650,000 to 750,000 birds are killed per year by wind turbines. And nobody seems to care about bats, but there's over 1 million bats that it kills as well. God made them too. So are wind turbines safe? Three blades, 350 feet long, twirling at 120 to 180 miles an hour, using flammable fuels, sandblasted and hitting large birds of prey. What could possibly go wrong? I want to live in that neighborhood next door. And here's some examples, and you can't see it very well, but these are a couple guys embracing before they die. So people do die. I mean, these things, there's flammable fuels, and it's going around and creating friction and all that. I mean, these things are not safe, and they're not all they're cracked up to be. That was in the Netherlands. Those gentlemen gave their life. Are they recyclable? Anything is recyclable, anything. It's just a matter of how much it's going to cost. Are they biodegradable? Certainly not. Fiberglass and metal? If not, what is their final resting place? Here we go, the landfills. And those are some of the little short ones. So Judith Gap Wind Farm completed in 2005. So those are about to expire, and there's going to be 90 wind turbines. That's 270 of these things, 126 feet long. And they're going to wind up like that. It's coming up within the next couple of years. Now this is a mobile on-site solution for recycling turbine blades. And that's a normal kind of a truck bed, size. And if you think about how many of those, this blade the size of a football field, how many of those it would take. And then I watched a video of recycling. It says we can recycle these things, no problem. And they chopped it up like a sausage, and they chopped it that way, and then they shredded it, the fiberglass and the metal, and then they burned it. And you see these big billowing black smoke. I mean, it is such a scam. Anyway, there goes the neighborhood. So toxic waste disposal. My patients and I talk about a lot of things, and a patient of mine and I, this was maybe about a month ago, we were talking about toxic waste disposal. He's just a very, very knowledgeable guy, really fun guy, and he's from the East Coast, and he hardly ever wears his hearing aids. He just refuses to, so he talks really loud, and I talk really loud, and it's because of him, I had to get special insulation in my patients' rooms, and I had to get really thick doors just for him, because we end up talking really loud, and I like to protect people's privacy. So anyway, but he's very, very knowledgeable, and we were talking about it. And what he told me about was that I was not aware of is that the Navy used to just dump their oil and empty it into the water, basically the ocean, but and they also, the Coast Guard did it. They all did that. They just dumped it. And so what he said to me, in a very, very loud voice, he says, the government was doing that back then. He said, you really going to trust them to dispose of all of this waste properly and responsibly? He said, come on, Anna. So, recycling of solar panels, wind turbine blades, batteries, it's not cost effective. Like I said, you can recycle anything, but it's not cost effective and it's dirty. The private sector won't do it, or it'll be factored into your price tag or subsidized by government. When I was manning the Republican booth, I was next to a solar panel couple guys that were running an organization that sells solar panels, and I was just talking to them, and they were saying, yeah, it's all recyclable. And I said, well, that'll be factored into the price, right? And he said, oh yeah, of course, which of course it will. So it makes them more expensive. And the private sector, they're not going to do it. They're going to have to be subsidized. They're going to go to their nanny government, and they're going to say, look, I'm losing money on this. I can't afford it. Bail me out, and the government will do it. And then the byproducts are toxic to the ecosystem. It's leaching into those landfills, or it's going up in big billowing black smoke when they burn these things. So are the toxic effects of solar and wind limited to lack of safety and disposal of panels and blades? No. The toxicity is in their production and function as well. So rare earth metals, also called rare earths, are mined to create rare earth magnets essential to sophisticated electronics like our cell phones and computers, and also solar and wind power. So when we consider the process of mining rare earth metals, we're talking about mining required for solar and wind power sources. There was an article that I read August 19th, it was Associated Press, Myanmar bears cost of green energy, the country below China. It says mining of rare earths causes environmental damage. And it got me studying more about this. So they're used in electronics and cell phones, from cell phones to trains, especially key to green energy is what they talked about in the article. Electric cars, batteries, wind turbines, generators. So I consider that the more that I studied, I consider it, I don't know if you folks saw the kind of gruesome movie Blood Diamond, but I consider what they're doing with the mining over there in Myanmar, in Mongolia, in the Congo, to be the Blood Diamond money colonial business model. And this was in that article by the Associated Press. The birds no longer sing, the fish no longer swim, the cost of rare earths is environmental destruction, the theft of land from villagers, and the funneling of money to brutal militias. They had a takeover of that government in 2021 by brutal militias, and that's what's running this. If the people complain, they too face the threat of death. So this is what is required for us to have green energy. Lithium mining and disposal is exploitive of workers and the environment the same way. Misuses water. Extracting a ton of lithium requires 500,000 gallons of water. And the preferential allotment of it to this mining destroys farming. Depletes water resources. Surface water contamination contributes to acid mist and fluorine gas, water table reduction, excessive water evaporation to concentrate the brine. So remember, they were always talking about the Amazon and the acid rain, and it's ruining the forests and all this kind of thing. Well, we got that action going there. So depletes fertile soil, causes soil erosion, removes trees and green plants, destroys habitats and minerals that plants require to grow, contaminates local water with sulfuric acid, uranium, and other things. It's a terrible hazard to humans and animals, respiratory illness, death. You're inhaling cobalt. So it requires fossil fuels for heavy machinery and roads that are required for the processes. So manufactured electric car, it might have a net negative impact on carbon emissions once it's already built, but metal extraction required for their batteries is carbon intensive, and their charging stations require hydroelectric or fossil fuels. This truck, he's probably not a small man. It's a Cat 994H. It burns 1,800 gallons of fuel in a 12-hour shift. The machine is required to move 500,000 pounds of earth in order to get the minerals needed for one single Tesla battery. In whose world does this type of math and Green New Deal make sense? Clean and green? Here's some examples. Doesn't look clean and green to me, and they're using a whole lot of petrol. This is a lithium leach field. On a hot day, want to dip in or drink some of that? I mean, this is disgusting. So there's a prediction there's going to be 125 million electric vehicles in the United States by 2030. And what is the cost of production and maintenance? Production costs, ecosystem unfriendly, as I described, practices of mining lithium and rare earths, also the cost of their disposal that we talked about. Maintenance costs requires hydroelectric and fossil fuels to charge batteries requiring mining. So the purpose of describing these problems with solar and wind is not to dismiss them as unviable, but to demonstrate they cannot provide what we need, and they are not environmentally friendly, not at all, and to provide evidence for an agenda that is not in our best interests. The hypocrisy is over the top. While I was making my slides for this and I was looking up photos, there was an article that it was about something, I think it was in Brazil, and they were having a big deal about some, one little road that was made illegally, and they were saying how it's going to impact the rainforest and all this kind of stuff. Look at these roads. Look at that. Yeah. I mean, this is for the rare earth mining that goes into green energy. And you can kind of see, well, there's still a little bit of green back there. That's what this used to look like. There's another one. Look at the size of that. I mean, if you look down here and you look at some of the vehicles, you look at that, I guess that doesn't, you look at that. This is huge. They're taking over the world. And again, beautiful green, that's what that used to look like before they took over. And this is what coal mining, those kind of things, they can look kind of like this too. But we talk about that. The ones that are for the Green Deal talk about that. They never talk about this. And I've actually, in the United States, I've never seen mining that looks this bad. And to my knowledge, they don't exploit children. This is rare earth mining in Mongolia. The guy is just covered with the radioactive and other poisons that's how he's making a living. These men produce oil for my diesel truck. These children produce the lithium for your electric car. That's in the Congo. And there are videos of these children and young adults being beaten by their taskmasters, like in the movie Blood Diamond. So is the popularized push for solar and wind power, is it designed for them to fail? They cannot serve our needs. They give a false hope of effectiveness and safety to the uninformed, and that's part of the deceiver's strategy. They also encourage flight from sustainable sources of power and water that are plentiful throughout the world, and especially in Montana. So the law of conservation of energy can be neither created nor destroyed, but it may be transformed one form to another. All sources of energy have equal unfriendly byproducts, sources of waste, toxic pollutants, and so forth. What would a truly green motor vehicle look like? I don't know if y'all remember the Flintstones. Some of you are old enough to remember that, but Yabba Dabba Doo, or was that Yogi Bear? I don't remember. But anyway, they used to pedal this thing with their feet. I mean, that's really the only green vehicle you're ever going to find is something that you can maybe pedal with your feet. So all sources of energy have risks and benefits. It's not an all or none phenomenon. Solar, wind, and electric cars are romanticized. We know that, and the problems are kept from the citizens. Risks of hydrocarbon use are exaggerated without taking into account the benefits that I'm going to talk a little bit about later. There's no free lunch. There's an example. See the mousetrap with the cheese? There's no free lunch. So unraveling Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, it's also known as Pork Barrel Enslavement Act and Life and Liberty Reduction Act. So why are subsidies needed for green power sources and electric vehicles? Because they come at great cost and they're not sustainable. Kind of obvious. And they don't fill our needs, people. They make absolutely no sense from any standpoint. And 20 years and $5 trillion later in government subsidies and investments in solar and wind sources of power, oil, natural gas, and coal still provide 84% of all the world's energy. And that's only down 2% in the last 20 years after, trillions and trillions of dollars put into it. The stuff doesn't work. Oil still provides 97% of global transportation, even though they've tried and they've, tried to bolster this up and pay for it. And so sun and wind are renewable, but the processes of production, utilization, and disposal of solar and wind energy, those are not renewable. Solar and wind power cannot provide what we need, require hydrocarbons or hydroelectric for production and function. Production, use, and disposal is harmful to the environment and people. So what are we doing? What would award-winning American economist and statistician Milton Friedman say about these subsidies for green energy were he still alive? I sure like this guy. The government solution to a problem is usually as bad as the problem. That's a quote from him. We have a system that increasingly taxes work and subsidizes non-work. Nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program. So-called infant industries protected by the government never grow up. He was the best. Okay, well there it is, a gas generator being used to charge the dead battery in an electric car. My day is complete. To all the green people with green cars, this is an electric charging station powered by a diesel motor. This is my favorite. A gas-powered van towing a diesel generator charging an electric car. The future is stupid. Are those pushing energy from solar and wind unintelligent, mentally incompetent? Are they on drugs, psychoactive drugs? What is going on here? Some of them, sure. But many good, intelligent folks are being deceived. They're driven and blinded by emotion and feelings. They're embracing sound bites from celebrities instead of pursuing depth of knowledge. Isn't that our education system? They're incapable of critical thinking. It's not encouraged. They don't seem capable. So what about the designers, the ones in charge and other beneficiaries in this fake crisis? Do these extremely wealthy and powerful people know what they're doing? The issue of competence or lack thereof of these individuals, it depends on their goal. What's their goal? If the goal of the Green New Deal is to provide enough clean energy to eco-safely take care of mankind's needs, it's a big fail, right? But maybe that's not their agenda. What if the goodness of mankind and environment is not their goal? Is that possible? What could make this blood diamond colonial model of business worthwhile, if not to help humanity, as it exploits men, women, children, and land? So winners in the new Green Deal, it's the same as in the COVID debacle, multinational corporation and the power of central banks. Those were the main winners in COVID-19. They're the main winners in this as well. COVID-19 rollout, it was the greatest transfer of wealth and power in the history of mankind. I think it'll be eclipsed by the rollout of the Green New Deal. Accomplished by a series of fake crises and the gullibility of we the people to succumb to manufactured fear in response to carefully constructed lies. Fake energy crisis based on a fake climate change crisis. The data does not support catastrophic predictions that have been made for the last 50 years. I mean, they've been predicting catastrophic climate change, just we're going to burn up. It's basically going to be as hot as hell, or it's going to be hell. They've been saying that since the 1970s, people. For 50 years they've been saying it. First it was global warming, and then it started getting cooler, so they said global cooling, and then they said, okay, we'll just leave it at climate change. It's a little bit safer. In the 1970s and 1980s, I mean, the predictions, they were based on computer models. Remember the computer models of COVID that were used to shut down the world? So all this, the horrible catastrophic things that were going to happen to us based on climate were also based on models. And they said, if we don't slash hydrocarbon use like now, we'll be out of oil by 1992, natural gas by 1993, There'll be uninhabitable pollution. We're going to be wearing gas masks if we're still alive, if we haven't burnt to a crisp. There's going to be mass climate-related deaths and other climate catastrophes. The United Kingdom's going to be gone by 1990. And there's going to be just hellish heat. So the veritable opposite has occurred despite a large increase in the use of fossil fuels. When they told us to use less, we used more. That's what we did. And it's arguably because of increased fossil use that there's increased life expectancy in India and China over those 50 years, decreased climate-related deaths by like 98%, increased reserves of oil and gas. Because when we talk about reserves, I mean, we have the ingenuity and reliability to go and find these. You know, maybe it's limited, the amount that's there, but our ingenuity and our technology, we are able to get more of it. So the reserves, the usable oil and coal and gas has actually increased in those 50 years. So when they talk about renewable, when they talk about reserves, it's actually gone up. And improved quality of air and material life. I mean, I don't think our spiritual lives and social lives are better, but in terms of material life, it has. I mean, everybody has a cell phone, most people have a TV. You know, we have all these wonderful things, and throughout the world, so many people in these impoverished countries have been brought out of poverty. So really nobody, in the last 50 years, because of hydrocarbons as a source of fuel, it's actually what has brought people out of poverty and given us all these wonderful little things, these toys that we like so much. And the quality of air is actually better than it was. And I've looked at photos of some of the coal mining. I mean, it's been made very clean, especially over in Wyoming. I think I put a picture in here of that. So why the improvements with use of fossil fuels? There's an author, Alex Epstein, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. I highly recommend that. Fossil Future, that one came out more recently. It's a larger book. It has a lot more information. It has really pretty much everything that the 2014 book has. But I just like the title, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, because the man, as far as I could tell, I haven't done a lot of research on him, but as far as I could tell, he's a secular humanist. He's not a religious man, but he places mankind as at the top of the heap. And he says that that is the most important thing, and that is where our moral, if you place your moral value in human beings, if that's your number one, whether it's because it's the pinnacle of God's creation or whether it's because you're a secular humanist, you're placing humans at the top. And when you do that, you're wanting to have sources of fuel that are going to allow people to improve their standard of living, right? So he makes a great case for it. And human ingenuity and technology, free market and crony capitalism, resourcefulness and financial and humanitarian incentives, all that is why, with the use of fossil fuels, we have been able to improve the standard of life for ourselves and for others. So, brownouts, water rationing, wind and sun, salvation in the treasure state despite abundant hydrocarbon and hydroelectric sources of power makes absolutely no sense. And I'm sure, you know, and we weren't the only area, the Flathead wasn't the only area that when there were floods that they were talking about possibly water rationing. I mean, I think there's a management problem there. So I think it's a manufactured crisis. The war against mankind is waged via control over your power and water. What we need is rugged, battle-proven leadership that understands the underlying unifying basis for these battles that we face. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. That is what we're fighting against. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States where men were free. Ronald Reagan. So what does the PSC do and how can it help? Back to that description on the website that says ensuring, and my view on this, ensuring that ratepayers have continued access to utility services that are affordable, reliable, and sustainable for the long term requires an understanding of what could adversely affect access, affordability, reliability, and sustainability. And that's one of the reasons that I spent so much time talking about the rare earth mining, so that you can see, you know, none of this, it's not affordable, it's not reliable, it's only sustainable if you want to enslave large portions of mankind. So PSC determining fair utility rates. How utility rate, this is kind of boring stuff, but anyway, how utility rates are set is based on complex analysis of large and small utility monopolies In the last rate hike request by Northwest Energy, it was in 2018, 2019, one of the monopolies, the information was 2,000 pages. The 2023 new data is estimated to be about 4,000 pages, so it's not a simple analysis. And one of the things, you have to have people looking at this that even know what to look for. They have to be willing to study, put in the time, analyze it, and even know what they're looking for. And so you have to know what's going on in the world a bit, in my opinion. It requires a decisive individual and experience in data analysis with the purpose of making judgments and recommendations. That's what you need. So there's some other things that the PSC does that I think is really wonderful. There was a House Bill 606 by Paul Fielder. That was back in 2021. And in December of 2021, the PSC adopted an opt-out policy for smart meters. What the company was, and we're going to go for opt-in later, but that's going to be the next session. But anyway, opt-out policy, because what the utility company wanted to do was just refuse to give people power if they weren't going to have the smart meters. So that was something really good that the PSC did. In March of this year, they voted to allow garbage disposal competitor in Missoula. What most people don't know, and I didn't know till the 2021 session, was that if somebody in garbage collection, because that's part of our jurisdiction also, if somebody wants to, a mom and pop want to do a little mom and pop garbage collection like they tried to do during COVID because one of the large monopolies was doing such a poor job in Missoula, they have to go to their competitor and ask permission, and then they have to go to the PSC and ask permission. I mean, it's really, and there was a legislator that tried to stop that. It was Caleb Hinkle. He tried to stop that, and it didn't even get out of committee. So we've got some work to do. But the PSC came through, and they voted to allow a competitor of garbage disposal in Missoula. So to me, that was a big deal. Shouldn't have had to be necessary, but anyway, things are what they are. So April, I watched this deliberation. It's one of my hobbies, is watching the PSC deliberate. But they voted that a power monopoly could not turn off power without a visit to the home. The company wanted to waive that. They wanted to just be able to turn people's power off at a distance and not even go and give them a physical notice, email them or something. And the PSC voted against that too. So they do a lot of good things that most people don't know about. Oh, and one thing I want to say, because I forgot to say it on my initial slide, is that job description and that strategic plan, Jennifer Fielder, she and James Brown came on January of 2021, and since there have been so many improvements, and she's the one, she has, I don't know how many of you know her, but she has a very organized brain, and she's very deliberative and extremely hardworking, and she's really straightened out a lot of the problems and has come up with a strategic plan that includes a job description. So kind of a big deal. So what does the PSC not do? It does not make policy or law. We have to work with the legislators and the different policy makers, so we don't make law, we adjudicate. It's a quasi-judiciary position. PSC commissioners do not don hard hats to climb poles, lay and repair cable and lines, or investigate accident sites. That is not part of their job. They have 36 staff with expertise in technical, legal, economics, research, and so on. So they have really good staff, and they go out there and do those other things. So as a candidate for PSC, I've been working with experts, policy, and lawmakers, and I've developed a proposal for bringing water compacts under PSC jurisdiction, and it's based on, it's based on U.S. Code, Montana, and U.S. Constitutions, that's supposed to say. Oh, there we go. And Montana Code annotated. So it's very, very much legally based, and it makes perfect sense, and I think it should be a go. And I have legislators that are very interested in it, and two of the PSC members think it's a really good idea. So, so anyway, I'm excited about that. So I've also been consulting with others for plans to extend coal strip units 3 and 4, the coal-fired plants, beyond 2025, and to purchase units 1 and 2 so that they can become Montana owned and operated. So there's a lot of talk about those kind of things. Working with others on legislative and pre-legislative funding for beneficial use of coal ash and other clean coal technologies. And I'm joining the fight to keep the dams working. Because once the election passes and these elected officials don't have to worry about getting elected, you don't know what's going to happen to those dams over in Snake River in Idaho, and that could take. Okay, so that's the Wyoming coal plant, very clean. So as a candidate and as PSC commissioner, I'll work closely with legislators and keep the citizens informed. That's my big thing. As a grassroots leader since 2008, that's what I do. So Montanans, you don't have to accept the inevitability of brown and blackouts, water rationing, dam closing, and unquestioned government subsidies for failed and failing green energy projects. Montana doesn't have to make the same mistakes as blue states like California. And one of my patients asked me the question this week. He said, what's the difference between the Titanic and California? And he said that when the Titanic went down, the lights were on. So I consider Montana to be the tip of the spear in this battle. And the tip of the spear, the military definition of that is the first soldier in battle facing the enemy. So, and the reason we're tip of the spear, because of our active electorate, legislators, and other freedom fighters, because we have everything we need for energy, independence, and water abundance, we can and must beat this back. Montanans, we can and must protect our access to power and water. And I realize that it's like a David and Goliath type of fight, and it seems really, really overwhelming. I know it does, and it seems really dismal and really grim, but I just never allow myself to go there. I think that feeling helpless and hopeless is probably the worst feeling there is, and I just don't allow myself to do that. So the way that I get out of feeling helpless and hopeless is I get active. I get a plan. And I just don't think if you have a plan and you're actively pursuing a plan to fight these different things, I don't think you can feel helpless or hopeless, because you're not. So, you know, win or lose, live or die, you're fighting. And that's what takes away, in my experience, the blues. So the Public Service Commission is important in this battle as the regulator of power and water utility districts. With liberty-oriented, God-fearing legislators and other citizens, we can beat this back. I am fully confident that we can do that. Anyway, Thomas Jefferson said, a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny, and that's absolutely a fact. The 2021 legislative session, there was a large focus on pro-life, pro-gun, medical freedom, election protection. That was the focus, at least the things that I was interested in. I'm sure they did a lot of boring things, but they did a lot of this exciting type of stuff. And they made huge gains. I mean, the legislators just did a fabulous job, especially with, well, pro-life, pro-gun, and medical freedom. It was amazing. And the way that they were able to do that is the electorate got involved. There were individual grassroots, and there were grassroots organizations that got involved, and they worked with the legislators, because there's a lot of pressure on legislators to cave in and not do the right thing. And some legislators, a few of them, will do the right thing no matter what, but others need a little bit of help to do the right thing. And the citizens got involved, and they just did a fabulous job in 2021. And so we can do that again in 2023. That session, there's going to be a huge focus on avoiding the energy and water crises, including allocation of funds for that purpose. I mean, I only know the tip of the iceberg of the money that's available right now to fight this crisis. And if we can get it into things that are practical, like this, I have as much passion for this, high-efficiency power lines, as I do for, you know, keeping coal strip open, because this could make a huge difference in our ability, and we have bipartisan support for that, because whether you're going to be getting it on the grid from solar or wind, or you're going to be using something else, you have to have the high efficiency power lines, and I'm pretty confident we're going to be able to get that, but that's my passion. We're working on it. I've not yet begun to fight. You know, this group, liberty-oriented, very enamored with the American Revolution and the Founding Fathers and all those people that fought for liberty, and you've got that God's law of liberty deep inside you, and you care a lot about that. And one story that I appreciate that I can really relate to, it was a general in the Revolutionary War where his farm and his home, beautiful home and farm, were taken over by the enemy. And as a general, he ordered his troops, artillery, to destroy his farm so that he could destroy the enemy. And so I can relate to that person because I have risked everything, and I will forfeit everything to do what's right if push comes to shove. And that's just who I am. And it's a proven record.